will understand. If we see a gene like the VDR TAC, which tells us that it's difficult for somebody to get vitamin D in through the skin cells and become like a little vitamin D machine, which is really how things should work. Your skin should act as a little solar panel and grab those vitamin D cells and take them right in through your skin cells. But if it doesn't work like that, like in my case, it answers a lot of questions as to why we have chronically low vitamin D levels. Now, I can test my vitamin D in my blood work and really determine, yep, that gene is spot on. I am running low in vitamin D. I may need to provide some supplementation, or I may need to adjust my environment, or I may need to eat more foods that contain bioavailable vitamin D, and really just help me to confirm what we're seeing in our genetics.
Welcome to the Fredrickson Health Show, highlighting expert practitioners from health, fitness, injury prevention, functional medicine, and integrative medicine. If you are into upgrading and optimizing your health, this podcast is for you. This podcast is for educational purposes only and not intended to be used as personalized medical advice. And now, here is your host, Dr. Robert Fredrickson.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode. Today we have a returning guest. We have Rian from Habit Method Health. Rian, thank you so much for coming on today.
Robert, it is my pleasure. I am so excited. I felt like last time we hopped on your podcast, we had so much to talk about. It was really difficult to keep it down to 1 hour.
It was, because last time we kind of got really nitty gritty on genetics and individual, genetic markers called SNPs, what those genetics mean. So I do want to talk about genetics today, but I also want to talk about kind of how you've done so much stuff over the past couple of years. It's been really cool to watch you personally and professionally just kind of grow and blossom and do all these different courses and different things. So tell us about kind of where Habit Method Health, your business, is right now, and some of the things you've learned along the way.
Sure. So Habit Method Health is a wellness consulting practice, and we really aim to help patients optimize their health wherever they are on their journey. And I think probably like a lot of the people that you work with, most of the people that come to me needing help and needing direction have probably already seen 10 plus healthcare providers, and they're really looking to start making strategic and goal-focused changes to drive optimized wellness. That is really where genetics comes in, and why we use genetics as a foundational tool to really help give us direction and next steps. But along the way, we've sort of built out all of these different areas to help people sustain wellness. So a lot of habit building. This is why the company is called Habit Method Health. We aim to make this really seamless and integrate this into your life. And I think that's really an ultimate goal, because if you can't do it forever, it's really, really difficult to start doing or to sustain it. So
Yes.
we started integrating all kinds of amazing wellness tools to help people get to that goal.
Yes. So if you don't mind sharing your personal story and how many people you went to and all that went into it, and then how genetic kind of changed that all for you. If you don't mind just sharing that story, because I think it's so powerful.
Absolutely. I think it helps me really to connect with clients that I'm working with now, because when they hear this story, they really understand, wow, she's been there. She went through what I'm going through, and she really understands how to get out of it. So I spent nearly a decade struggling with a series of rare autoimmune conditions that most doctors said I would never heal from. I ended up seeing over 37 providers across the United States, and everything from Mayo Clinic, Cleveland Clinic, MD Anderson, and was really given no answers as to how to resolve these health issues. I had 52 symptoms and 19 chronic diagnoses that
Wow.
It was pretty debilitating. It was rough at times, and it was definitely it made me feel directionless, because I was obviously been given information about how to maybe treat one symptom, but there was really nobody looking at my case from this global approach, or really zooming out and helping me understand how some of these symptoms were potentially connected to systems, and how every system is integrated with another. So really trying to kind of help me untangle that was really missing from my case. And so that's a lot of what I do with a client now, is kind of, a visual that I like to use is take that puzzle box, flip it over. And as we start flipping over these pieces of the puzzle, really helping to align and figure out what steps need to happen next for you to get a faster trajectory to healing.
So with your personal story, I'm assuming you were pretty healthy. You
Oh
probably
yeah.
lived a healthy lifestyle. I mean, you probably ate good. I know you exercise well. What were some of the symptoms that, if you don't mind sharing, what were some of the symptoms that you had, and what were the doctors thinking that you had? And like, did it come out of nowhere? Was it kind of a gradual onset? How was that trajectory?
A little bit of both. I mean, some of these symptoms came out of or seemed to come out of nowhere. And in hindsight, I probably had clues long before these symptoms ever really made.
Mm,
But truthfully, I think for me, what was happening was sort of this cascade or this domino effect of one symptom sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul, and then another system failing, and on and on and on. And so my symptoms started in my teens where with hair loss, which seemed pretty, you know, I don't think I got much attention for that. I think a lot of the doctors sort of brushed me off because it didn't seem like a life-threatening symptom. It was something that doctors looked at me and said, oh, this might just be something you're going through, and maybe you'll come out of it, or here's a steroid shot. It was always a patch job, but there really wasn't anybody looking to say, hey, let's take a deeper dive and try to understand the root causes of even these seemingly harmless symptoms like hair loss. Then it became my eyebrows falling out. Then it became a thyroid insufficiency. I ended up with chronic kidney stones. I really was hospitalized over and over for seemingly like the same symptom, treated for something else. And I would leave that hospital visit with a new symptom that then needed more patching. So it seemed like a vicious cycle. And eventually I got to the point where almost every system in my body, I was seeing a cardiologist, a pulmonologist, a nephrologist. I was seeing an endocrinologist, a hormone specialist, and I saw a neurologist at one point. And I remember meeting with a rheumatologist who said, hey, I think this might all be in your head. And then the next week I saw an endocrinologist who said, this is the most serious case we've ever seen. We really think you're a medical mystery. We've never seen anything this bad in someone your age. And so having kind of this juxtaposition between these two opinions was really frustrating. And that's about the time I threw my hands up in the air and said, there's got to be a better way. That we can't just keep patching these symptoms. I was a health coach at that time, and I like to think that I knew more than the average bear. And yet I was still struggling, trying to figure out how to untangle all of this. So when I found genetics, one thing that I remember thinking pretty early on was, wow, there's so many things in my genes that really explain why I ended up in this disease state. And that's not to say, I'm sure you've had this conversation with a lot of your clients too. It's not to say that my genetic information doomed me to this information. It's just that I was doing all of these things in my habits that were really genetically incompatible for what my
mm.
needed to function, and was sort of like led down this road of negative resolution. So once we started supporting these areas of genetic insufficiency, it was like all the lights started coming back on.
I love that, and thank you so much for sharing that, because especially today's day and age, we hear of the next latest and greatest supplements, biohack, whatever the case may be, and we think we have to do that. But in your case, like, you're probably already doing that, and until you kind of figured out your individual cues, if you will, you were actually able to kind of overcome, all the different things that happen. So tell us, I mean, if you don't mind, and I don't want everyone to try to copy what Ryan did, but what kind of genetics at first that stood out to you, and did you kind of go after initially? Kind of what were some of the big clues that jumped out to you and your provider that said, hey, like, these are the genetics, this might be explaining why you're having some of these symptoms, and let's go after kind of the root cause.
I really like to always start with foundational principles, really starting to understand why somebody develops maybe an inappropriate inflammation response, or
Mm,
why somebody's cellular function is not acting appropriately. And I think one thing that gets most often in my experience left out of the mix is, what can we remove? What can we
mm.
take out of your lifestyle? What can we take out of your regimen? What supplements are not serving you? And I think genetics can be really impactful for helping you determine some of that negative information. And I don't mean negative as in poor or working against you. I mean, how can we fill in the blanks using your genetics? Because if you are on a supplement regimen that is difficult to sustain, or maybe it's expensive, or it's getting in the way of you having a life, it's not going to work for you. So we really need to stay focused on pinpointing the things that are most effective and really simplifying the protocol from there. I think if we can start to remove things that are no longer serving someone, whether that's a habit, a supplement, a medication, a lifestyle choice, we really can boil down the symptoms, see what's left, and reevaluate. When I started with genetics, I'll give you some really simple examples because there certainly are some complicated ones that we might not want to dive into today. But I think for me, understanding that even something like my hypothyroidism, that doctors basically told me I would need medication for life. There was no reason why. I sort of just won the unlucky lotto of health issues and developed that. But the truth is I didn't. That really wasn't why I developed this. I just was doing a lot of things in my lifestyle that was down regulating my thyroid's ability to function optimally. And once we started removing those, the type of medication that I needed changed, the dose of medication that I needed changed, how the let's say the byproducts of hypothyroidism that were maybe a downstream cascading effect, those started to become lessened. And it just really allowed me to simplify and sort of rein in all of the different support options I was using. And that really helped me to stay focused on whether or not something was even working for me.
Yeah, it's because you're already doing so many things. You've seen all these different providers.
Oh my gosh.
Different
Yeah.
dosing medications. You're going to go to this doctor, get, this dose. You're going to this doctor, get that dose. So yeah. So, I mean, we both had similar stories. Mine wasn't probably as severe as yours, but, I was had a busy practice seeing patients, and I was basically getting home and was exhausted, and I couldn't get out. I was like, I had so much hand pain and joint pain that I couldn't make a fist. I couldn't touch my toes. I felt, kind of like a failure as a new father, because my son was 6 months old, and I still played with him, of course, but I felt like I could have gave more, because I didn't have the energy. And so lucky, and for me, I had a patient who kind of introduced me to Dr. Kendall Stewart, and I was like blown away with what they were doing. I'd already been to some, like 5 or 6 other doctors, rheumatologists. It was like, it's all in your head. You're good. You're healthy, blah, 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 blah. But yeah, it was amazing, because I turned on inflammation. I turn on inflammation very, very well, but I can't turn it off very well, which is a problem in and of itself. And I got this fly all over me. I'm sorry. So
no problem. No, I think Kendall Stewart has been such an amazing mentor for both of us, and really helped us learn how to apply genomics into our own specialties and into our practices. I always have such amazing things to say about him and his teachings. I think you're spot on there with the inflammation response, because I often think that's a component that really gets overlooked for a lot of patients dealing with these complex constellation of symptoms like mine. There was really nobody looking at why I was dealing with an inappropriate inflammation response. It was just like, okay, well, you are dealing with that. Maybe you just are unlucky 27 times. And I thought that just seems crazy to me. It doesn't seem to make any sense that my body would go from healthy, young, active, no, I wasn't dealing with anything in my childhood, to all of a sudden manifesting this massive list of symptoms that were unexplainable. So genetics for me not only gave me a reason why I was developing these symptoms, what I was doing in my lifestyle that was contributing and compounding these symptoms, but it also gave me a really simplistic roadmap to get out and how to start, what support options were going to be most effective for me. And for the clients that I work with now, I think that's the most appealing idea, is they come to me wanting to know, what can I do to get out? And what they leave with is not only how are we going to get out of this disease state, but what are we going to do to prevent further disease state? They walk away feeling really empowered because now they understand what is compatible for their genetics. And I think that's a really critical component that oftentimes when somebody's just maybe hopping online and getting a DNA kit through a company and going through an algorithm, not having a personalized or a personal interpretation, they're missing out on the opportunity to really interject all of these different layers of support.
Yes, and genetic testing, it's very, very, very popular now. Everyone, talks about it or does it in some capacity. And if you haven't done it, I hope you consider doing it. Now I got 2 flies in my house. I'm sorry, guys. Highly distracting for me. But Genetic testing. I mean, because there's companies where you just go online, upload the results. You see some generic protocols, and that might be helpful. It might not, but for me, it explained so much. I was getting hurt like you wouldn't believe, Ryan. I mean, I was like, why am I always hurt? Like, why am I always, like the one to like have a normal, like not a quote unquote normal, like an ankle sprain that would last for months. Why was, these, and then I was doing all the things, all the recovery methods. I was doing sports medicine practice, and I couldn't figure it out. But I was like, okay, because once I turn on the inflammation, I can't turn it off. But if you
Right.
give yourself the tools and provide yourself the right habits, because now that you know this information, it just makes so much sense. So maybe talk about just why your genetic testing or our genetic testing that we use is, I'm not going to say better, but maybe a better program that really uses the provider and the patient and kind of connects them both very, intuitively versus just using a computer algorithm or any other kind of, you know, commercial test, if you will. So maybe talk about
Sure.
that just a little bit.
So I actually wrote an entire book about this, and if your listeners want to access it, it's free, and it is
A
the
free
top
book?
a free book. And I know everybody today is kind of like, yeah, a free book. The nice thing about this one is it's pretty short. It's only 5 tips, and it's the top 5 things that I would find myself sharing with somebody when they would call me for a discovery call or to learn more about genetic testing. One of the most common questions I'm asked is, well, can I just use my 23andMe or my direct to consumer test from the internet? And I'll tell you the 5 reasons why we don't use that in my practice. And I'll keep it pretty short today. But the first and most important one is patient privacy, because a lot of these companies, you're sort of signing your information away. You're exchanging your information for them to either sell to a third party or to do what they would like to do with that information in exchange for this little test and some information back. So for me, that was immediately a no. I'm not interested in violating any kind of patient privacy
Yeah.
standards. And I think with the one thing that people really get concerned about, that are maybe a little more educated coming into the idea of genetics, is what's going to happen to my data. And so when we use a certified provider lab, that patient information is highly protected and it's anonymous, and there's nobody else with access to that. And I think that's really, really critical when we're looking at this for health purposes and not just entertainment. I think medical relevancy. Are we looking at genes that really are going to help you determine, should I do A or should I do B? Because that's what we're all here for. But if we're looking at a lot of genes that are just fun, fluffy, and entertaining, I don't know that that's necessarily going to get us the information we want to help make changes in our health decisions. And, there are a few others that I list in that book because I really think it's important that when you're going to spend and invest on a genetic test, because you really only need to test once, it's critical for you to make a decision that is informed. You need to make an informed decision about where your data is going, what's happening, what you're receiving back for giving your data to this lab, and make sure that it really falls in line with all of the boxes you want to check for results. A professional interpretation is my 5th tip in that book, and it is absolutely the most critical. And the reason I'm so passionate about sharing this is because I did it all wrong. And I really want to save somebody the time, the energy, and the cost associated with doing it incorrectly over and over. I made the mistake of not getting a professional interpretation and instead sort of attempting to piece together these little snippets of information that were hopefully going to lead me to something helpful and beneficial. But truthfully, I spent so much money doing it wrong over and over, and finally was led to a provider who said, hey, can I give you a little tip here? All of these little individual pieces of data don't mean anything if you don't understand the key component that brings them together. And it was like this light bulb moment for me. So now my goal when I'm helping somebody walk through their own interpretation is, how can we connect this data not only to the symptoms that you're dealing with right now, or for prevention, but how do these systems rely on one another for optimal usage? It's kind of like Have you ever gotten stuck in a traffic jam? I know you and I both are from small towns, and so if there's ever a day that those traffic lights don't sync up, it's all over. The traffic's a mile long, everybody's backed up, nobody's going at the right time, and you can't get anywhere. So I really like to think about genetic optimization being like all of these traffic lights are in sync, the traffic is flowing, you're not working against your genetics, you're really right in line with what your genetics are most compatible with, what they need more of, what they need to avoid. And that way, life just gets a little bit easier for you.
That's a great analogy. And a few things to unpack there, just a few questions I want to kind of dive a little deeper. So what are some implications like about selling your data? Is it that your information might go to a life insurance company and they might charge you a higher rate because you have XYZ marker that could predispose you to cardiovascular disease? Is it stuff like that? Or what else are we looking at for, why should we be concerned with our data being sold?
Sure. I think that's a great question. And some people, truthfully, they don't care. They're okay with that. I think the biggest concern for me is we just don't know. And a lot of these companies don't have to disclose that. So for me, it's too many question marks. It's too much guesswork. It doesn't feel safe, reliant as far as advising my patient to do that. So I'm really interested in providing advocacy, education, empowerment to help them make an informed decision. But the other thing that I think is really critical with if you were to get a consumer test is oftentimes you're getting back a lot of information, but really no strategy, because that's not the goal. When you get raw data back, it's not meant for you to have execution or strategy or really cohesive planning or an outline of what's going to be most effective for you. Whereas the test that we use, this is a proprietary test. I built this from scratch, line by line, gene by gene. It is 70 of the genes that I think are most clinically relevant to making decisions that are going to impact your health quickly and effectively. So it's kind of like speaking a language. If I can only choose a certain number of words to explain myself, how can I pick the words that are going to be most effective at explaining that? Genetics are the same way. We want to pick the genes and look at the areas of focus that are really going to deliver the biggest bang. How can we really interpret this in a way that is going to help us decide if something is effective or ineffective, or should we try this or not try this, or is this the root cause or not the root cause? So a lot of this information that we are looking at in the habit method panel is for people that they want answers and they want quick execution because they're tired of the runaround. They're tired of trying to put these little snippets of information together, and they are ready to just dive in for strategy.
Yes, thank you. And so for anyone, please explain, the difference in consumer genetic testing versus, what an expectant family might be testing, their young child for, what a geneticist would be looking for. Like, what are we looking for that might not, the differences in a hospital setting versus what we're seeing? Can you go over that a little bit?
Sure. One thing I really like to explain is, I'm sure you've heard this too. People often will tell me in a discovery call, well, I'm really nervous about testing my genes because part of me just doesn't want to know. I don't want to see anything that I can't do anything about. And what they're really thinking of are rare genetic conditions that affect less than 2% of the genes in our body. And more importantly, what we are looking at in genomic testing, 100% of the genes that we look at are something you can do something about. So maybe an easier way to say that is how can we look at genes that will change the outcome? And this is different than, I think what you and I grew up with thinking genetic testing was very binary. It was like, yes, no, you have it, you don't. There's nothing we can do about it. Whereas now that the human genome's completed, we really understand what genes are going to be impactful when combined with environment. And this is really where the idea of epigenetic support comes from. If we can simply downregulate a gene's default switch by using our habits, our lifestyle, our nutrition, our supplementation, or simply avoiding something that would contribute to that, we are much more likely to avoid that problematic disease state that all of us are either a lot of the clients I'm working with are already in, or they're really concerned about avoiding and preventing in the future. So the idea that this test is going to give you information that is somehow your fate, let's get that out of the way right off the top. That's definitely not what this information will tell you. And I think kind of like having a GPS system in your car, the earlier you know what's ahead, the better changes you can implement in your youth. So it's really about empowering and making decisions that provide genetic compatibility. You can make choices for the rest of your life that allow you to work with this genetic information instead of kind of going against it, swimming upstream.
Yeah, your genes are not your destiny. And I think a lot of people get scared or hesitant about genetic testing. It's like, oh, I don't want to find out. Same thing with the scale. Like, oh, I'm not going to weigh myself every day. I'm only going to weigh myself once a month, because I don't want to look at it. I don't want to see the changes. But yeah, so and I want to go over this with you because I think it's an important topic. If you get you get two copies, you're homozygous for a certain genetic, that doesn't mean all the time that it's going to be expressed. There's so many different things called epigenetics, which I want to talk about, that influence the environment and how these cells are expressed or how these genes are expressed and how we can kind of, cope with what we have and optimize, all the different things. So kind of go over that with us. What is epigenetics? How can we, if we get a test back and we see some things that we don't like, what should that trigger in our brains for us to do next?
Yeah, I think if we were going to simplify that into maybe one sentence, it would be, we are looking at genetics that provide actionable items. These allow us to take action in our steps. And that's really where epigenetics comes in. So if we think about epigenetics as the layer of environmental impact, how our genes are reading our environment, I think it really gives us a whole different perspective on how much control we have over this genetic information. So here's a really simple example. I had a client who had a double copy of an HLA-DQA2, which we know increases risk for something like celiac disease because these people just simply don't manufacture the enzyme that helps break down the protein in gluten called gliadin. And so with an increased exposure, this person could potentially develop celiac disease. But he was not symptomatic. He didn't have any of the symptoms. But what he did have was frustration around his mood and feeling like he could maintain consistent mood. He would have periods of highs and lows, a lot of struggle with things that were maybe labeled depression or anxiety, but he wasn't responding to the traditional approach of medication to support those symptoms. And so when we looked at his pathways, we not only saw that he had this HLA-DQA2 double copy, we also saw that he had some issues with inflammatory response that could potentially be hindering his neurotransmitters. And it's just like untangling how are all of these systems connected to one another and relying on one another. So for him, the easiest epigenetic modifier was just removing gluten from his diet. And I think you and I have had a conversation about this too, because you have some family members that have that gene.
Yep. Yeah.
And highly effective. And it's such a simple thing. He came to me asking, what supplements can I add? And we ended this conversation with, what can we remove? So really using epigenetics as a powerful tool to read this genetic information and then make lifestyle adjustments that will serve you tenfold.
Yeah. And it's such, because if you test someone early, you can find out, hey, we make some dietary, interventions now, really optimize the environments, hopefully we don't get, this disease diagnosis later on. So so I have a copy of, the gluten genes. I don't think it's both. I think it's just one. Yeah, just hetero. But so anyways, so I mean, I don't have any gluten issues, but I know that I shouldn't just go to town on gluten every day either. So,
and really speaking to the most cutting edge research around that gene in particular, what we know is that more and more people the more people we test with genetics, the more we're learning that this atypical celiac response may be the underlying reason for increases in things like depression, anxiety, OCD, ADHD. There's definitely a neuro contributor that we may be overlooking, kind of coming at this with a more myopic approach, that this gene is somehow only associated with gut dysfunction. We're learning now that because it's an autoimmune trigger, there are lots of different tentacles that this gene can affect. And so if we have somebody like this particular client couldn't get any traction using mood medication, but he had incredible changes because we were able to target the root cause of some of these imbalances.
I'm just wondering, is there any research out there on, the gluten genes on Hashimoto's? I mean, there's got to be, right? So,
Oh, absolutely. And we know that because gluten is a molecular mimicker for thyroid, there's a major link for people dealing with, let's say, treatment-resistant Hashimoto's that may be dealing with an underlying gluten intolerance. And let's really take a minute to kind of separate the idea that celiac risk and gluten intolerance are two different things. If somebody does not have a genetic predisposition, it's unlikely that they'll ever develop celiac disease. However, they certainly could develop gut issues, leaky gut, problems digesting gluten due to other things in the GI tract, like bacterial overgrowths or insufficient probiotics, or maybe using the wrong probiotics. There are a lot of things because gluten is a molecular mimicker. We can see this sort of kick up dust around other symptoms.
and I just want to bring up something. So I'm going to make a full circle back, but because in this industry, we hear these things that we shouldn't eat gluten, we shouldn't eat dairy, we shouldn't, the list goes on and on. And then you hear the opposite side. You can eat whatever you want. It doesn't matter. It's all, BS. It's just calories. That's all we need to worry about is calories. You can eat gluten as long as you're not celiac. And so, but I mean, the research is pretty clear. If you have these genes, you are predisposed, and it's like if you turn on inflammation, all these other things happen. Yeah, you can be more susceptible to these things. So maybe, yes, there are people out there who don't have the genes. They don't have to worry about gluten, for example. But there are people who have the genes that need to worry about it. So if you test yourself and you can make better decisions accordingly. So then we always say test, don't guess, right?
Exactly.
So
Make a t-shirt out of that for sure.
we should.
I'm not somebody that has any celiac risk, but during the height of my illness, it was definitely helpful for me to reduce the amount of gluten that I was intaking, because there are so many issues with poor detox associated with high intake. And I'm definitely not ever somebody who thinks there's a one size fits all or everybody should do this. Or I think it's really about bio-individualized approach. And the more we know, the more data points we can collect, especially with genetics, the better decision making we have available to us. But there are definitely some camps that would push back on this, and that's okay. I think everybody's entitled to their own opinion. I think if you're somebody that's struggling with autoimmune, it may be something to try, whether you have genetic information or not. We know that gluten is something that has a lot of exposure to pesticides and toxic chemicals. And so there may be some other genes we want to look at, like the NAT2 or the SOD2 or the genes related to other detox pathways. I think those are critical for understanding how this is going to affect not just your direct health, but indirect health as well.
Yes. So on the billboard question we asked last time, was it test, don't guess for you? Was that your slogan? I can't remember. I'm going to go back and listen.
Sure. I think that would be a good one. That sounds like something I would say, but I feel like I could probably write a whole book on just, like quippy little terms, like one-offs, but one day I'll get around to doing that. But I'm really someone that, my t-shirt would probably say fix the cell to get well. I really love.
Yeah, I like that one too.
And I think that really kind of helps people change the perspective. I think that's one thing that genetics does really well, is helps change the perspective on what you think is healthy. Because when I first learned about my genes, all the things I thought were really healthy for me really were not. They were really working against me. I mean, even some of the things now, I look back and I was eating like probably 4 to 6 cups of spinach. I was having like a giant spinach salad every night. And I'm somebody that's kind of sensitive to oxalates. And so having this massive bombardment of spinach without some of the balanced cofactors was creating an imbalance in my health. And, I came from a world and a time, in the early 2000s, there were a lot of people making suggestions for like sugar alternatives. There were big pushes for protein drinks and, these kind of healthy foods that we think are contributing to benefits. But really, when we break down these ingredients, oftentimes they're not even recognizable as food to the body.
Yeah, and I think everyone's an individual, not everything's going to work for everybody, but I mean there are some pretty solid principles is don't eat processed foods, eat as many whole unprocessed foods as you can. Um, but so just kind of I want to talk about how you use genetic testing when you look at labs. So how do you combine both genetic testings and more conventional or more advanced labs, and how do you kind of, use that data synergistically?
One thing I think genetics was incredible, at least in my own personal health journey, was helping me determine what blood work would really be relevant to codifying the data that we see in a genetic test. So if we've got this layer of genetics, that's sort of our constant, it doesn't change. How then can we add in this layer of blood work, which is simply a snapshot in time, what's happening right now? And
Hmm.
together, that's an incredibly powerful insight into what's happening in the body and maybe where the potential pitfalls are occurring so that we aren't spending a lot of time patching symptoms. We're really focused on a root cause approach. So one thing I think, here's a great, very simple example I think listeners will understand. If we see a gene like the VDR tag, which tells us that it's difficult for somebody to get vitamin D in through the skin cells and become like a little vitamin D machine, which is really how things should work. Your skin should act as a little solar panel and grab those vitamin D cells and take them right in through your skin cells. But if it doesn't work like that, like in my case, it answers a lot of questions as to why we have chronically low vitamin D levels. Now, I can test my vitamin D in my blood work and really determine, yep, that gene is spot on. I am running low in vitamin D. I may need to provide some supplementation, or I may need to adjust my environment, or I may need to eat more foods that contain bioavailable vitamin D, and really just help me to confirm what we're seeing in our genetics.
Yes, and I love that analogy. So many good ones already. The solar panel for our skin for vitamin D. I love that. So I actually have both copies of that SNP as well, the VDRTAQ gene. And I was perplexed for a while because I was, one to take pretty habitually vitamin D all the time. And I was like, why are my levels low? Like, how can I be low, right? I was like, how does this happen? But I figured out, okay, well, you have trouble converting from the sun. Not saying to not go out in the sun, guys, still get your sunlight, but it just says, hey,
Definitely.
you need to add in different things. And maybe it's not only just vitamin D, it's cofactors. Maybe it's a little bit of vitamin A. Maybe it's also magnesium, because I'm a big magnesium person. I could talk about that all day, but magnesium is required for seven different steps for vitamin D activation. So if you're deficient in magnesium, you're gonna have a harder time converting vitamin D to its active form. And so, yeah, so if you have that gene, you should maybe take more vitamin D. And how do you know if you need to take more vitamin D? Well, maybe you take a genetic test. So,
And then you can follow up with your blood work. And I think that's great. And, I think the other point that you just mentioned was utilizing your genetics to determine supplementation. We could take it a step further. We can use your genetics to determine, are you taking the right supplements at the right time in the right format? There are so many different layers to utilizing this information for maximum benefit. I think people often forget that when you take your supplements is really critical. Like vitamin D is a great example. That's like a sunshine hormone. We shouldn't be taking that right before bed. There are a lot of things that can throw your body off if you're taking that at the wrong time. Or vitamin B, if you want to use that to get better energy throughout the day, better cognitive function, that may be a better choice AM over PM. So just utilizing your genetic data to take a deeper dive. I mean, I've had my genetic test now for over 12 years and I still refer back to it. If I'm looking for answers to something, it's the same information. I just get to look at it through a different lens.
and I did the same thing. I was going back through a couple months ago, just looking at my test, saying, "Oh, what copy did I have?" Okay, the cool thing about it. It's a one-time test. You do it one time. You have that data, as long as you don't lose it, right? But you have that data for life, and you can use that to say, "Hey, so when I do my lab work, I say, okay, like, okay, my inflammation was not high, but if it was high, I could go back and look at my genetic markers for inflammations. Okay, so these, this is why, could be why." my inflammation's high, my CRP levels are high, or my blood sugar, or we could talk about blood pressure. And actually, I want to talk about blood pressure really quick because we were talking about magnesium. I was asking you some questions related to magnesium and genetics for my book, and you were mentioning the ACE2 gene. Could you talk about that and how it might relate to needing more magnesium, for example?
Well, one of the most interesting things, I think in more common approaches, the ACE2 gene is thought of as sort of the hypertension gene or
Mm-hmm.
associated with high blood pressure. And we're also learning now that there may be some implications related to insulin response. And I think that's really interesting because if we've been looking at blood pressure all wrong for the last 30 years, this could definitely change the way that we approach supporting somebody in reducing blood pressure. I think magnesium is one of those amazing supplements that probably everybody in America is deficient in. And I can't wait to hear your response to this. I know you are the magnesium expert. I also think that when you have a deficiency of magnesium, even for things like hypothyroidism, if we're looking at the FOXY1 gene, we know that that gene may require more thyroid support, so more minerals. Magnesium fits right in there. Everything's going to work better when it doesn't have to go rob from its neighbor. If there's
Mm-hmm.
this robbing Peter to pay Paul across all systems, we've got an insufficiency domino effect. And magnesium can really help to blunt that. We also see magnesium be well utilized for people with a GAD1 gene, which tends to be like a glutamate GABA imbalance.
Mm.
Magnesium is critical for helping us bring glutamate down to a more appropriate level. So a lot of the times, if you see a supplement that is for relaxing, you'll see things like magnesium. And different types of magnesium are going to work on different pathways. And I think that's also something you do a great job educating your listeners on. The ACE gene is so interesting to me because I think it sort of gets brushed off very quickly for just being one of those binary genes. You have it, therefore you're going to get high blood pressure at the end. But knowing that there's a lot of different ways we can support that, like improving our electrolyte function, getting more exercise, that's a really easy epigenetic modifier for the ACE gene. So just having some tools in your toolbox that you can start to implement really makes this kind of a no-fail situation.
Yeah, for sure. And that, I mean, yes, if you have hypertension in your family, if you have the genetics for it, yes, you should exercise. Yes, you should take magnesium. Yes, you should do all the things, hydration, sleep to reduce that. Of course, see the doctor if you're already on medications, of course, but it just makes so much sense and makes smarter decisions, really from a healthcare standpoint with genetic testing. Yeah, for magnesium, I don't know if every single person in the world should take magnesium, but I honestly, Ryan, I wish we lived in a world where we didn't have to take magnesium. I wish we weren't all deficient. I wish we lived in a world that didn't chronically stress us out, that didn't chronically deplete us, that we had minerals or food that was rich in minerals like we did, hundreds of years ago. I wish we didn't have to do it, but unfortunately, I just don't think that we can live in today's society without needing some supplements. I just feel like I wish we didn't have to. And I always get asked that question, shouldn't we get all of our nutrients from food? And I was like, I wish we could. I do wish we could. And even if you are getting all your nutrients from food, it probably wouldn't be enough because then you'd be really active, right? Because you'd be trying to live presumably a healthy lifestyle, exercising, sweating, losing electrolytes. And so it's just, I don't know. We are constantly robbing Peter to pay Paul. And so I could go on and on about it, but yeah, it makes perfect sense.
I think a lot of the ancestral foods, like whenever people ask me that question, well, why did my grandmother not need supplements? Or why did my great grandparents not need supplements? Well, I think the simplest answer and something that most of us can agree on is that the food just hadn't been tinkered with nearly as much as it is today. And sometimes that's to our benefit, and sometimes it's not. Sometimes that's an issue with distribution or mass production. There are a lot of explanations to why the food has changed so much in the last 75 to 100 years. But, my great grandmother wasn't. She had access to things that I probably don't have access to today. She was also eating a lot of things that I probably won't eat. I would love to say that, yes, I'm someone that's going to like gnaw on a femur bone after dinner. It's never going to happen, right? So the sources of minerals that were maybe happening in a diet regularly being thrown into soup or stews or utilized for gelatin 100 years ago,
Or liver and onions. Yeah.
and onions. Even in the 1960s, liver and onions was a staple on many menus. And today we don't ever see that.
So I see it sometimes. I just can't do it. I just can't do it. So I have to, I can't. I know it's good for me. I know it's nutrient rich. I know these things, but I'm like, no, it's not for me. So
I always crack up because I make my own dog food and people will joke like, wow, your dog has really been biohacked. I mean, she's eating, the smash diet and she's eating liver and, all of these goat kefir and really amazing foods. I'm not there yet. And so I'm going to be really particular about the supplements that I use to help basically supplement my diet. I think that's really the takeaway is how can we utilize our supplements to enhance our diet, not replace a poor diet. And that really goes back to the idea that we can add in things, but unless we're removing the potential problems, we're really not going to make much headway. There's never a solution that simply consists of continuing to make bad choices or bad habits and simply patching with a supplement.
yeah, that makes no sense. And we should definitely find the root cause. And I'm really big into not just supplementing magnesium, but finding out why were you deficient in the first place? Was it from the lack of food? Was it from all the things that deplete magnesium? Figure out those things first, compensate, then use magnesium as a tool to kind of get you out of that deficiency, and then take it just to feel better. Because it's funny because you don't actually see kids with magnesium deficiency, and we know kind of what kids eat, standard American diet. We know what they eat, but they don't really have the deficiencies until later on. And so then it's like, okay, what's happening there? Is it the stress? Is it the coffee? Is it the alcohol? Is it all the above? All the medications now, because a lot of kids aren't on medications at a young age. I don't know.
I think that's a really great start to being your own detective, is going through and just taking an audit of your lifestyle, taking an audit of your daily habits. How much stress are you under? Where could you potentially be leaching nutrients? Those are really critical steps. And a lot of my job in my practice is helping somebody to do that audit, to really take this mass examination of everything that's contributing to their health, and then start breaking down piece by piece. What do we need to support? What do we need to remove? I mean, even something as simple as household cleaners, we know now people are bombarded with. We're exposed to thousands of chemicals a day that are impacting our genetics. And the more that we understand, the easier it is for us to start identifying, removing, and making really simple, healthy swaps. I did actually build your audience a booklet, a little healthy habit tracker that talks about simple swaps. And I'd love to offer that to them. I'll send you the link for any show notes. But
perfect.
That's something that I think really helps my clients when I share this booklet with them. Not only does it help keep them accountable, it helps keep them on track. We can stay focused on our goals because everybody's busy and life is happening at 90 miles an hour every day. Just having somewhere that you can check a box, that you can say, yes, I did it. Okay, I'm going to refocus. Maybe I lost track over the weekend. Now I'm going to get back on track. It really helps to solidify and refresh all of these habits that you want to implement.
Thank you so much for sharing that healthy habit tracker with us. I'm going to definitely include that in the show notes. I wanted to briefly talk about how you've kind of tackled insulin resistance with genetics. And also, I know that you're a big fan of continuous glucose monitors. So kind of talk about how that has worked in your patient base and some of the results maybe you've seen recently.
Sure. For most of my career, we have supported patients with things like supplements, offers to connect to practitioners who can provide medication, lifestyle changes and nutritional changes, additional testing. And we felt like this year, especially, we were seeing a little bit of a hole in our ability to help somebody identify and track things specifically related to metabolic function. What's really impressive is that metabolic dysfunction is happening in the majority of the population, and yet it's something that most people aren't talking about. We're all really focused on our health, but we're maybe not focusing on the things that are really going to lead us to the root cause solutions. And especially in North America, blood sugar stabilization seems to be a critical component that's getting overlooked and really not discussed until we are in full-blown disease state. So in America, it's estimated that less than 12% of the population is metabolically healthy. And there are a few data points that we collect to determine that, but blood sugar is one of them, fasting blood sugar. we like to use, in my practice, we've started helping patients connect with continuous glucose monitors, which really used to be reserved only for people who already were type 2 diabetic, to allow them to instantly scan their blood sugar and determine what foods were creating these massive or inappropriate blood sugar spikes. Continuous glucose monitors have been a very helpful tool for our patients who are even borderline type 2 diabetic, or patients who are not pre-diabetic yet, but are definitely experiencing highs and lows, maybe hypoglycemia, maybe energy crashes throughout the day. It's just another set of data points that we can collect to then overlay and understand. Since genetics can't give us real-time information, this is a way for us to look at someone's genetics and say, oh, wow, you may have, let's say, really poor autophagy, your ability to get trash out of the cell or glucose into the cell. That mechanism is a hurdle. What can we use in our real time to help us support daily changes? The glucose monitor really does that. And the coolest thing about these monitors, I'm sure most people have seen somebody wearing them. They're a little, I'm not wearing mine today, but a little disc that you wear on the back of your arm. It's not a needle in your arm. It's just a very small filament. And you can use your cell phone and simply wave it over it, scan it, and get a real-time reading. So some of the things I learned wearing a glucose monitor, and I was using it for maybe some even fringier purposes than what a lot of my clients use it for. But I learned that I can't eat bananas on an empty stomach. These for me look like I might as well be eating a box of donuts. There was I had it too. Even just a single banana was wild to me. And that's something that I think a lot of people would come in and say, oh, this is a healthy food. This is a whole food. It's found in nature. Why wouldn't this be a good choice for me? So making sure that I'm stabilizing my blood sugar. My first meal of the day is always savory now. I like to implement some protein, often some animal protein. Maybe I'll have eggs and a little turkey sausage and some blueberries. And that's going to give me so much energy throughout the day compared to something like a banana or a piece of toast that's going to spike my blood sugar and cause this massive drop off later, energy crashes throughout the day. That for me was so eye-opening and such an empowering experience.
Yes, so I had the same experience. Mine was with rice. I saw like just it wasn't immediate, but it was the highest surge you could get was with that. I was like, wow. So maybe if you are working out really hard and trying to replenish glycogen stores, maybe that's an option for after workout. But maybe for me, I was like, I don't know if I need this spike all the time, for every single meal. So I thought it was really, really cool, really insightful. And I did see some other things I didn't expect to spike like they did.
Yeah,
And also, yeah, and also stress, had a big impact the days I was more stressed or had not as good sleep. I saw, higher increases in my glucose responses. So very, very interesting data, indeed.
And there are often times that I have patients that think they're making really good choices. And same thing for me. I think one of my worst spikes ever, I was at a practitioner event, and this day was just like one fire drill after another. I mean, we were in a room, out of a room, shuttled over here, moving. It was so much stress. And I knew that I was like feeling very behind all day. I was trying to get where I needed to go. I felt like I was running late half the day. And at one point I sat down and I shoveled, this plate of food into my mouth. It was like chicken breast and a salad. And I thought, surely this will be, a nice, healthy, smooth blood sugar response. And no, it was the worst spike I've ever had. So much worse than, say, if I had a piece of birthday cake at a party. So I think understanding that sleep, stress, your environment, certain medications, there are also some very helpful clues that I've had. I'll save this maybe for another podcast, but certain medications that can cause a massive blood sugar reaction. And so I think having this data is just one more layer that you can kind of dive into your health and start making really empowered decisions.
Yes, for sure. So Ryan, I wanted to ask just a few questions, kind of coming to the end here. What are your future goals for yourself and for your business, maybe for the next 5 years, personally, professionally?
Sure. So
if you don't mind sharing.
Absolutely. I would love to. We are a concierge wellness service. And so one of my goals is to launch a course that would allow people to work with me who maybe don't feel like concierge service is the right match for them. A lot of what we do is getting to know our client very closely and hand holding and being there, giving them lots of access to us, putting them with providers, one-on-one matched providers. And that's difficult to do on a large scale because it really requires a lot of time. But one thing I think I could do that would help anyone and everyone trying to improve their health is give them access to the tools and the data that I use with my concierge clients. And so we've started to build out my online course. It's called Genomic Method. And this is really built around the idea that we're going to take your genetic data and we're going to implement a personalized method for you so that you can build out these strategies layer by layer, system by system, really using your genetics to help stay guided on these goals. So we're also moving into some really interesting spaces. We've connected with some incredible providers. We have access to a peptides program now. We have access to our continuous glucose monitor program. We've integrated some gut health testing, which I think is a critical component for overall health and helping people really stay focused on root cause approaches. So there's lots of different things coming on the horizon. I've been so honored and blessed to be a part of some really incredible projects in my own personal strategies and really sharing that with my client population, just really helping people stay focused. And I think one thing that I hear really often from clients that are new to habit method health is there's just so much noise out there. There's so much to weed through. And if we can really help them just tailor down what to stay focused on, I think that's the best start to untangling your health. If it feels complicated, you're doing it wrong. We need to come back to home base. Keep it simple, start with your daily habits. Even if you can't spend $1, there are lots of free resources that will allow you to improve your health.
Definitely. So thank you for sharing that. So now let's get to this question. So if you could reverse roles today, if they ask any questions that we didn't cover, were there any topics that you'd like to go over real quick?
I don't think so. I think we covered everything. I made a couple of notes for you, but I think we always have so much fun. We talk about so much, and I feel like every time I'm on the phone with you, we could pull that string on the sweater and just.
I know we should just start recording the conversations. I know. I think I said that last time. I was like, we should record this one. This was so good, but this was great too. So if you could put a sentence on a billboard in the biggest freeway or interstate in Austin or New York, wherever, what couple sentences would you put on there and why?
Always stay focused on the root cause, or stop symptom patching. That's something that I tell every single client that I work with. I think everyone who comes to me is pretty frustrated by that point. So slogan of the day, don't symptom patch, focus on the root cause.
Love it. Or fix the cell to get well.
Fix the cell to get well. Can't go wrong with that one. I know that people always say, well, what does that actually mean? Well, when you see your genetics, it becomes really, really clear because your genetics are not going to change. The information we're looking at, you can support, you can suppress, but that information is yours. It is your blueprint. It is your roadmap. It's going to make life very helpful for you navigating future decisions. Come back to that genetic information. Stay really focused.
Yes, love it. Okay, so if you could take one herb, supplement, botanical on a desert island, what would you take with you and why?
I think you did ask me this last time, and I think my answer has not changed. I am a B complex girl. I will tell you, Robert, I tell every one of my clients and every one of my providers, I'm kind of like Simon Cowell. I don't think anything is all that great until I find this one thing that really changes my life. For me, B complex is a game changer. It's one of the few supplements I really feel if I miss. It's something, especially a methylated B vitamin. For me, it turns my brain on. It really helps me feel alert and steady. It helps me to digest my food better. There are so many, it's just a jack of all trades for me. It was one of the supplements that when introduced to my protocol really turned things around for me. I tend to be someone, genetically speaking, who runs low on B vitamins, and I really need to make sure I'm getting them into my diet. So I think for me, B complex, methylated B complex would be my desert island.
Awesome. Love that answer. I don't know if I need to go back and listen, but yeah, that's That's great. We haven't heard too much about B vitamins lately. So, but yeah, they are so important for energy, for methylation. The list goes on and on. So, Ryan, thank you so much for coming on today. I really hope we can do it again in the future. We always have so much to talk about. So I just want to say thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for sharing the resources, the Healthy Habit Tracker, which we'll put in the show notes. And for anyone listening, where can they find you online?
You can find my website, habitmethodhealth.com. My Instagram is at habitmethodhealth. And you can always email us hello@habitmethodhealth if you have questions or you want to set up a consultation.
Awesome. Ryan, thanks again for coming on. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you later.
Thanks for having me, Robert. Have a great day.
Thanks for listening to
too.
the Fredrickson Health Show. This podcast is for educational purposes only and not intended to be used as personalized medical advice. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss a single episode. While you're at it, leave us a rating and review. Follow us on social media and subscribe to our email newsletter for more information.